In the 1990s, a shadow fell over Colombia. It wasn't a cartel or a paramilitary group, but a single man. His sadistic spree would force a painful national reckoning, exposing horrifying gaps in the country's laws and forever changing how it protected its most vulnerable people. This is the story of how one of history's most monstrous serial killers became the tragic catalyst for major legal and social reform. It's a story that begins not with a monster, but with the children he hunted in plain sight. Section 1. The Invisible Evil. The Colombia of the 1990s was a nation in chaos, torn apart by guerrilla warfare, powerful drug cartels, and political instability. The country was simply overwhelmed. And in that turmoil, a silent epidemic began. Across dozens of cities and rural towns, children started to disappear. They were mostly boys between 8 and 16, from impoverished families. They were street vendors, orphans, and kids from rural areas, the most invisible members of society. Their disappearances were rarely connected and often dismissed by overstretched police departments as runaways. In a country dealing with daily bombings and kidnappings, who was looking for a poor child who hadn't come home? The answer for a long time was almost no one. This systemic blindness allowed a predator to operate with terrifying freedom. His name was Luis Alfredo Garavito. To his victims, he wasn't a monster. He was a friendly, unassuming man who posed as a monk, a street vendor, a charity worker, or a disabled person. He was a chameleon blending into the background. He'd approach children with offers of food, a little money, or the promise of a job, small kindnesses they rarely received. He would gain their trust, sometimes walking with them for hours, and lead them to remote fields or abandoned construction sites. There, the friendly stranger would vanish, replaced by the monster the world would come to know as La Bestia, or the Beast. The full horror of what happened in those isolated places would only come to light years later. For now, there was just the quiet grief of families whose children had disappeared without a trace. The problem wasn't just Garavito, it was the system. At the time, Colombia lacked a unified national database for missing persons. Police departments in different regions operated in silos, with no standard way to share information. This fragmentation meant a killer could commit a crime in one town and just move to the next, leaving behind a trail of isolated cases that no one was connecting. The brutal truth is that the society and its laws had made his victims invisible, and in doing so, had made him invisible too. Section 2. The Unraveling. The beginning of the end for Garavito didn't start with one brilliant piece of detective work, but with a series of horrifying discoveries that could no longer be ignored. In the late 1990s, bodies of children began turning up in multiple locations. A particularly grim discovery of a mass grave near Pereira in 1997, containing dozens of boys, sent a shockwave across the nation. This was clearly not a string of isolated tragedies. It was a massacre. As investigators looked closer, they began to see a chilling signature in how the victims were killed, and they realized a single methodical predator was moving across the country. But he was still a ghost. Garavito's downfall came, almost anticlimactically, on April 22, 1999. He was arrested not for murder, but for the attempted assault of a boy who managed to escape. At the time of his arrest, he gave a false name, and for months, he sat in a jail cell as a minor suspect, while the country was hunting the monster responsible for the mass graves. The breakthrough came when investigators, following a hunch, confronted him. In a closed court session on October 28, 1999, Garavito broke down and admitted to his crimes, begging for forgiveness. And then he started talking. The confession that followed was one of the most disturbing in criminal history. Garavito didn't just confess, he became the archivist of his own atrocities. Citing his sharp memory, he drew maps from memory, leading investigators to one gruesome scene after another. and to burial sites police didn't even know existed. The numbers were staggering. He was ultimately convicted for the murders of 138 children. He confessed to killing around 190. Investigators fear the true total will never be known, as many disappearances were never reported. As news of his confession spread, a wave of horror and rage swept across Colombia. The nation was forced to confront the full scale of the evil that had been festering in its blind spots. The public outcry was deafening. They demanded justice, but they would soon discover that the Colombian legal system was horrifyingly unprepared to provide it. Section 3. The Reckoning and Legacy. In 2000, the Colombian courts handed down a sentence that seemed to match the scale of the horror. Luis Garavito was sentenced to 1,853 years in prison, the longest sentence in the nation's history. It was a symbolic number, meant to reassure a horrified public that justice would be served. But it was just that, a symbol. The reality of the Colombian legal framework at the time was far different. A critical aspect of the system was about to turn national outrage into a crisis. At the time of his sentencing, Colombian law capped the maximum effective prison sentence for any crime at just 40 years. The 1,853-year sentence was a headline. 40 years was the legal reality. But it got worse. The law also offered significant sentence reductions for cooperation. Because Garavito had confessed and led police to the bodies, his sentence was eligible for further reduction, sparking fears that it could be cut to as little as 22 years. The public was confronted with a sickening possibility. The man who had murdered hundreds of children could potentially walk free in a matter of decades. The backlash was immediate and immense. Protests erupted. The families of his victims, who had been ignored for so long, now had a national platform for their rage. They weren't just angry at Garavito, they were furious at a legal system that could offer such a lenient outcome for such an unimaginable evil. The case laid bare a horrifying truth. The laws were simply not designed to handle a monster of this magnitude. This public fury became an undeniable catalyst for change. The Garavito case forced the Colombian government to confront its legal framework. Spurred by overwhelming public pressure, lawmakers began to reform the penal code. In the years that followed, the maximum prison sentence was increased to 60 years. While this change came too late to affect Garavito's sentence, it was a direct response to the loophole his case had so horrifically exposed. The reforms went deeper. The case highlighted the desperate need for better child protection systems. It fueled the development of specialized units for investigating crimes against children and the creation of a centralized national registry of the disappeared. These changes helped lay the groundwork for stronger child protection laws, like the 2006 Code for Childhood and Adolescence, which established a more comprehensive philosophy for protecting children's rights. The story of Luis Garavito is a chilling reminder of how evil can thrive when society chooses to look away, but it's also a powerful testament to how tragedy can force change. If you find these investigations into the stories behind our laws compelling, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss what's next. As for Luis Garavito, the fear that he might one day be released lingered for years. In 2021, a judge rejected a request for his early release, confirming he would remain behind bars. He never walked free again. On October 12, 2023, Luis Garavito died in a prison hospital from complications related to cancer. He was 66 years old. His death brought a quiet end to a story that had terrorized a nation, but his legacy is a complex and dark paradox. He was a monster, a man whose name is synonymous with pure evil. Yet his horrific crimes forced a reluctant nation to confront its deepest failings. He exposed a legal system that was broken and a society that had failed its most vulnerable. The reforms his case helped inspire, the new laws, the stronger institutions, the shift in cultural awareness, have undoubtedly helped save future generations of children from a similar fate. In the end, the monster who brought so much darkness to Colombia became a tragic trigger that forced the nation to create a better, safer future for its children.